Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Gigi Dixon, and I'm with Wells Fargo. We are very happy to present this afternoon's fireside chat featuring Jaye Fenderson and her guest to talk about collaborate to innovate, a very important concept, wouldn't you say? All right. Well, at Wells Fargo, we really enjoy collaborating and innovating with our nonprofit partners, and we've had a very good time working with the Go College Now. Some of you may be familiar with that, with our student segment at the bank. And today is going to prove to be a very interesting and hopefully invigorating conversation. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jaye to the center.
Thank you, guys. So this is interesting. I expected there to be a little fire in the middle. I'm gonna improv a little bit, just so you guys know. In the back, we're gonna be sitting here and we're gonna be playing a film up here. So if you want to get a good vantage point, I might encourage some movement towards the front of the room. But again, my name is Jaye Fenderson. I am part of a filmmaking team with my husband here, Adam, and we're the directors and producers of an upcoming documentary called Unlikely. And we're really excited to be here today to debut the 4-minute promo for the film. And one of the people featured in the film that I am a huge fan of is Bridget Burns. And so I'm excited that you can come on up, Bridget. I'm excited to, yes, she deserves a huge round of applause. Excited that I got to interview her for the film, and that we get to have another conversation today to hear more about the amazing work that she's doing with the University Innovation Alliance. And I also want to say hi to everyone who is watching the live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in. Right now I'm going to have Bridget come up, and she's going to share, for those of you who aren't familiar, she's going to share a little bit about the University Innovation Alliance, which I think is one of the most exciting things happening in the country today. She's going to tell you a little bit more about what she's doing and what some of the top research universities in our country are doing to improve student success and college access.
All right, awesome. I will navigate both. We will see. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. This is awesome, and I'm really excited that me and LeBron are apparently have a lot in common now. We're just like gonna hang out, right? I was like, these are really famous people. So I was just gonna share with you a little bit about kind of my organization and what we're trying to do. But I do have to admit before I begin that I'm probably the least likely person to be talking about higher education innovation. Like many of the students who are profiled in the film, I grew up in poverty in rural Montana, and I was not really supposed to make it to college. I was one of those kids who just barely made it to the right side of the tracks, and then I ran like heck. And in fact, I think most people were pretty surprised. But when I got to college, myself, just like thousands and possibly millions of other students, I discovered that there's a disconnect between what I expected and believed about college and what the reality was. I thought that if they knew my background, and they were the smart people, surely if they were going to encourage me to take out student loans, that they would keep an eye out. They would help make sure I made the right choices, they would pick the right classes, that, you know, knowing what I was not coming with, that they would step up for me. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. I ended up registering for super interesting classes that had nothing to do with my program of study, and I ended up graduating with a bachelor's degree 7 years later. And I had 50 extra credits that I didn't need, and the student loans to show for them. So like a lot of students, fortunately my story works out, but what I discovered in that moment was a dirty little secret in higher education. And that's that higher education was not actually designed around students. We just haven't had the luxury of design, intentional design. We have to be everything to everyone. It's often very reactionary. It's knowledge and teaching and research. It's efficiency and accountability and public service and economic development, and you name it, we have to do it for everyone. And we really have never had the opportunity to step back and see exactly how we're engaging with students and whether or not it's optimizing and setting them up to be successful. But if you know that this is true, we actually can solve a lot of the problems facing higher education and this country. There's some resistance when I talk about this, so let's just assume that you're with me on this point. If we believe this is true, then we can address the challenges, and the first of which is that right now we're facing a shortfall of college degrees. We're simply not producing enough to keep up with our demand. About 11 million is our shortfall, and essentially people expect degrees for things they didn't used to. and we fail half of all the people who walk in the door. So ultimately, for the degree productivity has to step up for the economic competitiveness of the country. But the piece that really matters is in a few years ago when the Alliance first formed, something really troubling happened, and that was for the first time in US history, low-income students are now the majority of students in public K-12. So the surge of students who will be coming, who are going to need higher education and we need to step up for, are going to be from a background that unfortunately we do pretty terribly with. So this slide is pretty famous out there right now. And what it is it shows you income quartile bachelor's degree attainment over the past 30 plus years. So over there on the left-hand corner, in the 1970s, if you were born into a background like mine, I would have had about a 6% chance of getting a bachelor's degree. And despite all of our talk about innovation and progress and everything's better, it's only about 9% now. And we see that high-income populations have gotten better. We know progress is possible. But unfortunately, the only thing that's really progressed is the achievement gap between the high-income and low-income earners. So essentially, we need to step up as a country, as a sector, and the students who are going to be coming who need our help are going to be from a background that we historically don't do a very good job with. And it's possible for us to actually address this problem, but we first have to work together, which is the whole point behind collaborate to innovate. The thing that really matters is that every system is perfectly designed to get their results, and so the higher education system, as it's currently designed, is perfectly designed to get these results. And the freeing thing about that is that if you realize it's a design problem, it's not an intention problem, two things happen. First, it frees you up to realize that there isn't someone menacingly twisting their mustache in an ivory tower wanting this to happen. Faculty and administrators and presidents and provosts and chancellors, they actually care about students, and it's really just a design flaw that is leading to some of these outcomes. The second thing that happens is that you realize that if there is a design problem, there is a design solution, and that means you can make change at scale. But you first have to acknowledge it's a design problem. And there are a few challenges associated with this that you need to look at from a design perspective. The first of which is that every person who works in a university, they all have a lane. Part of the problem is we're pretty obsessed with our boundaries. Everything is about moving our own institution forward, but everyone has a lane. You know how to get hired in your lane, you know how to get fired in your lane, you know what to own, when you should talk to students, when you shouldn't. The problem is students are interacting with these hundreds, if not thousands of lanes, and it feels like lanes of traffic. And we are over-communicating, we are under-communicating, there are roadmaps and booby traps and landmines and all kinds of things that we're simply not aware of. The second is that this is what the modern higher ed administrator looks like, and faculty, I would say, as well. And it's basically that we have a dangerous belief in our sector that if we just give you more work, that your plate will expand. And you know, best wishes, right? And that is just not actually a sustainable model. And we also have this really problematic notion that instead of acknowledging that there's actually work to be done, and we need to probably get a person to do it who's going to last in that position, what we do is we get a retired person to come back at 0.49, and they do the work, and then they go away, and the org chart pretends like nothing ever happened here, nothing to see. And over generations, our institutions they're not really designed in the way to produce the kind of work that we need always. And so we need to be more strategic about how we support capacity, because the reality is that most people who work in institutions like this, they can barely get through their inbox at the end of the day. And so we're simply not optimizing. But here's the thing, when you do live that life, administrators or faculty, and they do want to innovate, they have a tiny bit of time, energy, they really want to make a change. When they go to the higher education sector and they're ready to ask, where do I go, what do I do, what's the investment, what's the best ideas, this is what it's like to talk to people in higher education. It's constant puffery, and we talk only about how amazing everything we do is, and everything is the most incredible thing, and we don't talk about failure, and we don't share what we learned from lessons of failure, and therefore we are forcing other people to live that failure again, and students are the ones who are paying the price. So we have to create and change our culture so that it actually rewards the courage of vulnerability instead of the constant pretending like everything is amazing. The last is that change, institutions really spend a lot of time siloed. There's a lot of tinkering, and as much fun as that would be, the reality is that institutions have to get out of their silo of working only within their institution, and they have to actually work together. The only way we will actually address this challenge as a country is if we all are working on innovating and scaling and actually proving out these things, but ultimately we're not repeating mistakes over and over. So these aren't just ideas that I'm just like hopey changey, hope we get there. I've actually spent the last few years working with institutions around the country who've actually been doing this. And what we've found is that it's entirely possible, and it's something that other people can do, and there's not anything special about us, and we want this to turn into a movement. So these are my institutions, and they are spread throughout the country. You saw a little bit in the video about Georgia State, which is one of our campuses, being supported by our strategic mastermind, the McGraw Prize winner, Tim Rennick over there. But the thing about these campuses is that when they first started working together, it was the presidents and chancellors who formed this. They decided that they wanted to unite around a sense of urgency, that we had to do a better job, that we weren't doing a good job when it comes to low-income first generation and students of color, and we weren't producing enough degrees, just period. And going it alone to solve those important problems as a country is a real big waste of time, energy, and money. So these presidents and chancellors were the ones who formed it, and they didn't know each other. We didn't have any money, and when we first announced we were gonna do this, people rolled their eyes, because they were like, oh great, another thing that higher ed announces, because we're like really good at that. We announce things and then just like, peace out. So these institutions, however, really took it seriously. They're transparently sharing data, they set ambitious goals, we meet regularly, we spend a lot of time together, and actually we've scaled up a lot of innovations across the country. When we first rolled out, we set a public goal that we were gonna produce an additional 68,000 degrees, and at least half would be low income. And when we submitted this goal to the White House for their College Opportunity Summit, they didn't believe us, and they made us actually show the data to prove that it was possible, which is good, and we did. And then now, since in 3 years, we're now on track to produce 94,000 additional degrees in that same time period. So it's the institutions, yeah, thank you. I really had nothing to do with it. It's legitimately these campuses, they stepped up, it's their leadership. I don't educate anyone. But the great part about this is that we're showing that anyone could do this, right? People didn't expect it to work. The most important piece is that we have 400,000 students and 120,000 low income. And in 3 years' time, we've increased our low-income degrees by 25%. So change is possible. All of the things you hear out there that change is not possible, that people will not change their behavior and work together, and you can't change culture, it's not true. So we think this is really powerful, and we think that other people should be replicating this work, that we have hope that this can be spread elsewhere. And so there are a few things that are high-level points that we hope others working to replicate this will take away and can be helpful to the field. The first is that everyone has to actually form a student success team. That's not actually super radical, and when your middle name is innovation, people expect that everything you talk about is like chatbots and AI, but turns out teamwork, revolutionary, right? But actually most campuses don't have a student success team. They have a committee, and any committee that's existed for more than 3 years should probably be disbanded, and having a meeting is not an outcome that should be measured. So we actually need to form teams that are deputized by the leadership of the campus, that change over time based on the projects. So sometimes different folks are involved, but they are actually held accountable and they are really supported. In the past, if you did create a team like this, because of our capacity problem, we would borrow someone's like 0.01 FTE executive assistant, and things wouldn't necessarily happen in between. We were creative about that, and we created a fellowship program. One of our fellows is here in the audience, Ashley, from UT Austin. And what we did is we found early to mid-career smart thinkers and doers that are often representative of the backgrounds of the students we're trying to serve, and who, many of them have PhDs, some don't, and they have different unique backgrounds, but they're becoming trained in project managing change and innovation and supporting the transformation and collaboration between these campuses. And that's the skill set we know future higher ed presidents need. And these folks are awesome, they're really the engine, and they staff and support the teams. So work continues between campuses. The fellows are actually its own career trajectory. We hope to be cultivating an entirely new college president in the future, and they are super awesome. Please don't take them. These are the projects that we've already scaled in the last 3 years. The first was the Fellows Program, which we stole from Arizona State. They had a fellowship that was supporting the president. But then we did predictive analytics and moved on to proactive advising, where we're doing a 10,000 student random control trial under the leadership of Tim Rennick and Georgia State. And now we're on to strategic financial interventions. But what really matters here is, unlike other initiatives that you just kind of like throw spaghetti at the wall and you add like, you bolt on a little program here, a little niche program there, they're actually designed to be stress testing each other. So you cannot BS about predictive analytics if we're in proactive advising, because you can't actually implement it if you don't have it. And it would be very difficult for you to do strategic interventions if you didn't actually have your analytics framework set up. So, because too often it's easy for people to say, oh yeah, I have that. You have signed a contract with a vendor, but it's actually not a light bulb that you turn on. It's actually a multi-year, very difficult process, and having collaboration partners helps make it possible. So I just want to make sure that it's clear about exactly what the alliance is. So I find that an analogy is helpful. We looked everywhere when we first started. We looked to whether it was Carnegie's Improvement Science or the healthcare community innovation around the 100,000 Lives Initiative or the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. We looked at design thinking, you named it. But I actually found that things that had nothing to do with higher ed were way more inspiring. So for me, when I think about a community of practice that really helps people in terms of improvement, I think probably the best one that's ever existed is Weight Watchers. So Weight Watchers is a very simple concept that it basically tracks to what we're doing. No one can sign you up for Weight Watchers. You have to sign yourself up, right? And so you set the goal. There's transparent data sharing. There's weighing in, often on the same scale every week. And when you do well, they don't shame. They praise you, but if you don't do well, they don't shame you. There's enough of a culture of scarcity in higher ed and shaming, and it doesn't really work. But the most important piece is in Weight Watchers that people then share in a community of practice about what they're struggling with. Not that radical. But this is basically what we're doing, is that we have created a space where people can be transparent and vulnerable with each other and share what they're really struggling with and ask the dumb question that is actually probably the best question, that if only we could create more environments where people would ask those questions. The way that it plays out for us is, this is an example. So we create convenings. We have one coming up next month for any campus in the country that wants to join forces in April 3rd through the 5th in Atlanta. If you go on our website, we're still taking, we have more than 50 campuses joining. But when you come to an Alliance event, it's not like a conference. We think we're spending millions of dollars on conferences, and that's great, but they're not actually designed, there's no pedagogy, and we're not really designing around the people who are there. So to come to our conferences or our events, you have to come as a team, and there's no keynotes, there's no panels, it's flipped. It's 7-minute talks, it's failure sharing, it's off-the-record time, it's team time, and so we design it so that people, when they leave, are ready to take action. And in one example on the left-hand side, upper corner, that was where Georgia State shared a really hard thing that they'd done. And because they were willing to share that hard thing that they went through, which was basically finding out how they were getting in the way of their students, then the team at Michigan State heard that and they were inspired, so they got their fellow trained in process mapping, and we got all the fellows trained in process mapping. Process mapping is not very innovative. It is just like a thing that lots of people have been doing in lots of sectors. It's not that fancy. But it's kind of radical in higher ed, especially in this space. So on this bottom corner is what happened at Michigan State, which is they decided to map out just a 3-month window of time from the time the student gets admitted to the day they show up on campus. And what they found is they were emailing 450 times in that 3-month window. And I think every campus in the country is probably doing this because we will ruin email, right? And they had 50 types of holds a student could have on their account before they showed up that the university didn't know about. So there are all kinds of things that we don't know that are actually not helpful for students. And because Michigan State wasn't afraid of sharing this story, and we praised them heroically, because it really was heroic, them sharing this, in higher ed most of the time, this would have been shoved under the carpet, nothing to talk about here. And instead, because they shared it, now every one of our campuses is now doing process mapping, and they've been able to do it in multiple different ways, and whether it's about their advising, or it's transferring, or it's changing their major. So what we're finding is that if you create an environment where people are honest with each other and they actually see each other as allies, that you can absolutely transform the future of higher education. So that's one example of kind of how it is to be in the Alliance. And that's about our summit, if folks are interested, but I'm happy to take questions. I just ultimately wanted to convey that when nobody expected this to work, anyone could do this work. It really shouldn't be a club, it should be a movement. And so we're hoping that other people will start working together to accelerate innovation so that we can actually close the achievement gap. And that's all, thanks.
So you can probably see now why I was so excited to have the opportunity to interview Bridget for our film, because she's amazing and brings such a great energy to the space that I think we don't often see in higher ed. Higher ed, at least in my opinion, can sometimes be boring, and you're anything but.
Thank you, but I love higher ed. But yeah, I get maybe sometimes. Sometimes it can be, but it's fun. It's great. No,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So I think one of the things I want to talk about is that, all of these innovations are super exciting and interesting, but traditionally it feels like higher ed doesn't incentivize outputs in the way that you frame them. And so how do we get other institutions to say, this is important, we need to do this, and make it a priority?
So the output in terms of innovation, of collaborating, or focusing on student success outcomes?
Focusing on student success.
I mean, most of these institutions are really, they're somewhat up to the whims of our sector, right? The value system being imposed on our campuses is not something that we feel like we have the right to change. So we're incentivized based on rankings that are mainly focusing on don't admit any students who are a risk, and in fact, but you should give them hope. Like, there's an incentive for us to drum up your interest and get you to apply and then turn you away. That's actually the way you move up in the rankings. So we have very skewed value system that is not something that we have historically felt like we could control. And it's always felt like we just kind of have to go with it. And then we have state policymakers as well. And whatever they say, we'll just go with it. But I'm seeing that campuses are discovering that we can actually change this. We can change the value system. And part of it, what we're trying to do is by modeling the value system within this group, but then also rewarding and highlighting other people who step up and do bold things. So we're seeing other campuses and other organizations try and replicate this work, which is kind of what we're looking for. But yeah, the incentives they're skewed at best. That's a nice way of saying it.
And institutions are pretty competitive too. I think what was interesting when I first heard about the UIA is that all of these institutions are located in different states, but they're not competing against one another necessarily. Can you talk a little bit about how that helps in terms of collaboration?
Yeah, so I'm basically cheating, right? Because my campuses don't compete for students or resources because they're not in the same state. Unfortunately, we pit campuses against each other like in the Hunger Games if you're in the same state. And so that really doesn't make people want to share. That doesn't make people want to trust each other. In fact, some of our campuses have a harder time getting ideas shared to other places in their own state. I know that's true, especially even of a couple of our, yeah, I won't out anyone today. But it's mainly that, again, this is something that is forced upon us to some degree. I think that what is really helpful, the awareness that happens over time, is people realize, oh gosh, we're actually all struggling with the same problem. And it's not a new problem. It's just a radical idea that we should put our heads together. 11 heads are definitely better than one. But it's hard because most people's exposure to collaboration is pretty terrible. Like, I used to be in a university system life. I was a chief of staff for a system, and I actually think I was a big part of the problem, right? Because I didn't understand what I was doing was not helping collaboration. I was literally pitting them against each other, and I do think that people need to have a positive experience with collaboration before they want to give it another go.
So one of the things that you mentioned in the clip that we saw, and it plays out a little bit more in the film, is that institutions are not designed around student success. So can you comment a little bit more on that? How are they designed? What is this flaw that you mentioned earlier, these flaws, and how are they harming students?
So I think there's a lot of places where we're starting to see that user design, like, there's starting to be an awakening and awareness, because we're experiencing it in some places where a product or a service we use is designed around us, and we're like, God, it's just so much easier. This is nice. This is how it should be. But in higher ed, it's not malicious. It's legitimately, we've existed in some cases for centuries, and we are constantly firefighting. It's reactionary. Every day they get up, there's a new policy that's coming down the line, there's some report coming out, there's some article that's going to be negative, something happened to a student. It's just a constant from every angle, and very few, there's never really a moment where they can be like, hey, stop. Let's just see, how are we interacting with our user? How are we actually helping? And nobody has that time or the opportunity to just push pause. And there are a lot of examples of how it's not designed around students. Like, the one that's very obvious for me is that every campus I've ever been to, we claim that graduation is what we're here for, right? Like, that's the outcome. And yet every campus I've ever been to, if you want to graduate, you let us know, because we don't know. And even if you do want to, we're going to charge you, and you're going to fill out some extra paperwork, and then there's some extra forms. And I'm sorry, that's insane. If that was the outcome you wanted, then why are you creating roadblocks? And yet it's part of our culture. We just think, and there's always a reason, well, we got to pay for the registrar's office or that. But it's like, that's insane. If that's what we wanted was the person to graduate, then we should be the ones who are telling them and saying, hey, you should not do that one extra class. You should do this other thing. Because we can see 7 months from now, we're ahead of you and we're here to support you. But instead, it's like totally on their shoulders in many cases. Now, some campuses are really waking up to it, but I think that's the example that like I've yet to see anyone be like, oh yeah, we have everything's totally user design.
And all of this is not easy. It's not like these innovations happened overnight. It takes hard work. It takes self-reflection. Can you talk about the commitment of some of the leaders? Like, I mean, you told the story about Tim Rennick, the work that he did to really make some of the change happen at Georgia State. Can you talk about the commitment and what it takes to make these changes happen?
Yeah, so you could come in and do one of these jobs and not be committed, and you wouldn't see the kind of success happening, right? Like, we're seeing that people genuinely care, and it's people who are going above and beyond. Like, the willingness where Tim Rennick is basically the vehicle for idea distribution in the country. Like, he's just willing to get on a plane and go to your state and give a speech and like explain how you do innovation. That's a manual, very slow way, but he's been willing to do that extra work for free because he actually cares. We have lots of folks who are like that, who are very selfless. But so you wanted me to talk about the commitment from the leadership. I would say, so most of my presidents, almost all of them, are former first generation, low income, or students of color, and they grew up and they turned into college presidents, and they're actually trying to save the world. Like, that's legitimately what happens when you invest in these kinds of students, is that you have no idea the possibility. And because they are so personally committed, it's a non-negotiable. And again, I'm somewhat cheating because most presidents don't have the luxury of being able to pick one item that they're going to keep, and that's going to be the priority, because often their priorities are either board determines, and then the legislature, and then there's this, and then there's this, and it's often we are literally firefighting.
You mentioned earlier too that there was this skepticism when the UIA was formed. Like, that's great. You guys go get them. And then now that the research is coming out, the results are coming out, people, they can't not pay attention to what you're doing. So have you seen a shift in the landscape? Are you getting more support? Are people coming on board and wanting to replicate what you're doing?
Yeah, so we're seeing lots of different initiatives roll out that are inspired by this work. So we've seen organizations in South Africa and Australia who are replicating this and trying to riff on the idea. We've also seen the America's Talent Initiative was directly inspired by us, and it was because there was no incentive in the elite college sector. And while they're not doing the exact same thing, it's because the idea that you could do this collective impact stuff and it could really be about student success was valuable in setting ambitious goals. And then APLU has just announced that they're going to be trying to replicate it. We've had several other groups like Oasis Network. So it's very exciting for us because when we first rolled out, like, we didn't invent collaboration. There was the CIC, and there were all these great organizations and the Association for Collaborative Leadership out there. But this was the first time a group of universities decided to focus on this one issue, and this was what we're about, and we're not about anything else. And so it's very exciting for us because we really feel like it's a movement. And so yeah, it's been at first, like, it was really hard to get anybody to pay attention to us at all. And now I think they're kind of like, yeah, the UIA, you guys have gotten enough. You're good. So, and that's a good place to be in.
One of the excuses that Tim mentioned in the video, and we've talked about, is people say that it's just not possible to graduate poor and low-income students, first-generation students of color, at the same rates as their peers. But obviously, Georgia State sort of proved everyone wrong. Are there other excuses that campuses have for why they can't innovate, why they can't scale, challenges or barriers that they face?
I think every campus has a story, a narrative on their campus that is about why they can't change, right? And if you don't know what your story is, then you're not actually empowered to write it, or you're not the author of it. Every campus I go to, oh yeah, we tried that. Or, yeah, we're not gonna do that because, we tried to reach out to that company or this, right? So there's that piece, which is very strong. But I think that what we found is there seems to be this weird belief that there's something different about these students, and there's not. It's that the whole thing is not designed around students. And then on top of it, when there's already going to be booby traps and landmines and things like that that just make things difficult, that if you're on top of that, you're working 3 jobs, or if you're on top of that, it's your first time coming to college, or you're also dealing with institutionalized racism. Like, there are extra things that get in the way, right? It's not the student's problem. It's that the whole thing was not designed around students, and then the people who have extra challenges in their life, of course, are gonna get tripped up. And that just kind of flipped mindset makes a huge difference. But I mean, once Georgia State proved that you could eliminate race and income as a predictor of outcome, and they had a $40 million budget cut, I'm sorry, there's just not really a good excuse if they can do that with those kind of financial constraints. It is the financial sustainability strategy in higher ed. If you stop hemorrhaging students and actually shore that up, if you keep them in and you actually help them graduate, it's financially it's a lucrative position, right? Because you're no longer just having to hustle for enrollment and then just, don't look over here at how we're just losing, half of our student population. So I think it's going to change the mindset for institutions, but it's just taking a little while for people to actually get the whole story, get all their questions answered.
Do you think there's a growing pressure within society outside of higher ed to improve these outcomes, or is it just a conversation that's happening in higher ed? I mean, do you think this is something that our government's talking about, or parents and families? Where is this conversation going?
Yes, we're getting lots of attention and pressure from all kinds of places, but I think that those things wane over time, right? So policymakers might pick a topic for a while. I don't think that policymakers should be leading on this issue. I think that we're modeling that actually institutions can lead, and then policymakers can follow behind and identify places where a policy could have been a good solution, but we don't need to be pulled by the chain on student success. Our campuses know more about it, they care about it, and people on other campuses, they care about this. Nobody's proud of the fact that we're failing our students. There's literally no one who's okay with this. It's that there are actually hard things, and it's hard. Change is hard. Higher ed is legit good at not changing. That's what these are bureaucracies that have lasted longer than the church. It's a source of pride that we can resist change. And so it's actually hard to navigate bureaucracy and to navigate those things. And bureaucracy exists for very good reasons, to protect terrible things from happening, right? So sometimes it's a little slower, but I don't know if I answered your question. I think I just rambled. Sorry.
That's what I love about you.
I'm going to take a left turn here.
I can't even tell you how many amazing sound bites we have from Bridget's interview that we had to not include in the film. We could have just made the Bridget Burns documentary.
Thank you for excluding the ones that could have gotten me fired.
So what do you think, in higher ed, we know about these schools. We know the schools that are doing a good job with student success, but students and parents who are making these decisions, spending tons of money to send their children to school or taking out student loans, they're often left in the dark about where to go. So how do we do a better job at educating the public and making sure that students do end up in a place that's going to serve them well?
Well, I think part of the issue that needs to be addressed is how higher ed talks. I think we're not very trustworthy to the public because we do say everything we do is amazing. And I'm experiencing this because I'm a big sister with big brothers, big sisters, and my little is in the college search process. And it's so, I'm supposed to be an expert in this area, and it's the most humbling thing because she is getting fed a line of BS everywhere she goes about things that I'm just like, no, why are you suggesting a low-income first-generation student would take out that much money for an arts degree? I cannot believe some of this stuff, and we need to have that sense of responsibility, but I think it's the candor piece. In higher ed, we're not comfortable talking about things in a way that we can say anything slightly negative about one of our programs, and it makes it difficult for people to believe us sometimes when we're talking about the other stuff that is actually good. I think this is a space where we actually need to innovate the way that we are open to being transparent about, the conversation around the college selection process. I think that the fact that colleges are worried about shutting down, worried about not hitting their enrollment numbers, it makes it really hard for us to say, yeah, that program probably, I don't know if I would do that, right? Who's going to be that honest? And so I think that's part of the skepticism about the college degree right now is entirely, it's not because that skepticism is actually justified, it's about the level of candor coming from higher ed that feels like we're not as trustworthy as we could be if we were much more transparent and much more candid about some of these things. And I think that's going to happen over time, but I think that this is something that is a worthy undertaking for us to really own because we've got to figure this process out. very concerning. For the parents and the students, it is terrifying to make the wrong choice, and they are getting inundated. And the claim anyone can make is, oh yeah, we have a good program in that. What does that even mean? Who says who? And like, where is the sense of responsibility to not give bad advice to these kids? I think it's very concerning. But we have great people who are really diving in on this. Our campuses are figuring out ways to kind of flip the script on this and redesigning kind of most of our programs based on actually setting students up to be successful. So like one of the ones that is not really about the college selection process, but I think is probably the most innovative flipped script I've seen is the University Leadership Network at UT Austin, here in Austin. And instead of like traditional just financial aid of like, you know, here's your money and then best wishes, what they've done is created this network of students where they identify students who might be expected not to perform at the highest level because they have a different background that's over time. We have historical data that shows that they're more challenged. And they say, congratulations, you're in the University Leaders Network, and in exchange for you doing X, Y, and Z, which are all proven things that we know would make you successful at college, in exchange for those things, we're going to pay you this money on a monthly basis. And it's financial aid, but it's like flipping the idea of what if instead of just being handed a check and like, you know, best of luck, what if instead we said, you know, you're actually being paid to do the things that will actually make you successful. And the data that they're seeing is dramatic. We just saw, was it in the New York Times, the story about this program? So, I mean, there's some very creative like switches that I think as long as the rest of higher ed starts picking these things up, I think we can address this kind of skepticism and the fear around the college selection process.
Awesome. I certainly hope so. So I want to leave some time to open it up to questions for you all. So yeah, we'll jump in.
So I'm from Toronto, Canada, and we've had an interesting situation in 2013. I'm going to frame my question a little bit, where a series of nimble learning startups opened up in the city. One in particular was challenged by the government because, well, these startups were producing better graduates, predominantly in tech-related fields, right? They were producing stronger graduates out of 2 and 3 month long programs than our colleges were producing out of 1 and 2 year programs. More capable, more industry ready, more job ready. The response of the traditional PSEs was not to sort of try and match or compete, but just to simply say, you need to be shut down and you're not accredited, and that's in fact what happened. However briefly, they managed to engage the right members of parliament, and they got a precedence-based legal system out of the country to actually change, which never happens. And now we have 12 of these, more or less, in Toronto, all competing with each other. It's good for students, it's good for industry, and it's good for the economy, right? And I asked because I didn't see, I saw mostly traditional PSEs among your list on your slide. Is there, I wrote my question, is there room for traditional PSEs to collaborate with these nimble tech learning startups, and what can they learn from each other, and what should that collaboration look like?
Yes, and a post-secondary institution, I think. So yeah, I mean, I think so. That's unfortunate that happened. I think that there are some pretty traditional models of these types of institutions, and I'm not threatened in the least by these alternative providers. As long as, one thing that is concerning is I hear a lot of trash being talked about the value of a college degree when people are putting it up against a 2-year or 1-year college alternative that has zero data. And they're not going to actually be able to say they have real data for 10 years because we won't actually know the employment outcomes of those people for 10 years, right? Because it's not just about one position, it's about employability over time and adaptability, right? But I think that those are awesome programs. Like, I think we should learn from each one of them. There's some of those in the United States where I see them as a future hat to the bachelor's degree. I don't think that, I think we should have as much diversity in the market as possible. We collaborate with technology partners that likely connect to this kind of work. All of our campuses are working with a variety of different technology partners, and I work with organizations like that, like Minerva, or I have a friend who has a program called Mission U, again, college alternative, and it's more, I'm trying to learn what they're doing and be supportive. Again, not threatened in the least, like millions more college degrees are needed, and that's the traditional bachelor's, and it's just because we know that you're gonna earn $1 million more in your lifetime. But I also feel like we're going to be able to adapt and solve some of our challenges as a sector if we're less threatened and fearful. Like, that's unfortunate that happened, but yeah. So, and by the way, so ours are traditional, like large research public universities, not because we think that's the best. It's actually because it's the most rigid and difficult to change. And so if we start there, we actually think that some of the lessons could be applicable. If we picked an easier category, I'm sure that people could be like, oh yeah, but you don't know what it's like when you have a research agenda, or you don't know what it's like when you have football, you don't know what it's like when you have a state legislature to deal with, or a system. No, we do. Got it. Yeah. So I would just say, yeah, there's plenty. As long as it's in the service of more students and serving students, my only thing is like a lot of this hyperbole about talking trash about the value of a college degree. It's like, yeah, we have like generations of data, and that's fine. Like, you can raise skepticism when warranted, but I do think that like making claims that it's completely replacing it is like, well, call me in 10 years when we actually know that person has been able to adapt. Oh, great.
Education News Organization, and I was struck by the fact that you admitted that the colleges in your alliance are all in different states, and that's good. It's made it easier to start this method. If you want what you're doing to be replicated, and you say it's very hard to do that when colleges are competing with each other within a state. So what's the solution?
Well,
if collaboration is so important, how can it be done if you are competing with each other?
well, so I think the piece that really matters that people need to take away is that nobody competes on this. You can narrowly define your collaboration around something that you're going to collaborate on, and then we don't talk about anything else, right? So we're not going to talk about formula funding. We're not going to talk about these other things that are competitive, that are going on in our legislature. We're just going to talk about student success, achievement goals, or achievement gap, right? You can narrowly define a collaboration in a state. It's harder, again, because they know each other already. So there's possibility for things to have happened in the past that make them less generous, or frankly, what I see over time is that, they betrayed me, or they did this, or yeah, did you see that billboard? Their logo was above ours, or it's like over time there's just the narrative that it depends on the state how competitive it is. Some states that's not true. We're seeing the Cal State campuses are wanting to really take this up, and I'm hopeful that they'll be successful. But it's more that people who are in your state, you can call them, you can go show up to their campus. Further away, it's a little harder, but the ideas exist in the United States. You can actually find a campus who's worked on what you're talking about, or is at least also interested in working on it. And I don't think that you should just try and create your own experiment without at least trying to vet whether or not there might be allies who could help you move faster.
What I'm asking is, how do you get those allies to do that if their first instinct is to compete for students?
Well, we're really lucky because the topic of student success, like, who's against that? Like, we literally picked a low-hanging fruit in that it's the thing that gets everyone out of bed in the morning. It's the reason why everyone works in this sector, or they would go somewhere to make money. Because everyone who I work with, they all had their lives changed by someone, and that's the reason why they work in higher ed. And so it is so close to their heart that it's easy to galvanize a sense of collective passion about ways that we could all do better. And if I was working on something different, I think it would be a little harder. But again, there's no competitive, I wish kind of there was an award for the campus who does the best at this, but that doesn't exist. We're trying to make student success sexy and try and create a drumbeat where other people will value this and turn their heads in this direction. But what it is that most institutions have a million different priorities at any moment in time, and it's not that they don't care, it's that they have a million different priorities, and it's reactionary most of the time. So if you can create an environment where people are getting added value and collaboration is actually making their jobs easier, not harder, because a lot of times collaboration, it's like extra work for you that you didn't get paid for with that zero extra time you have, And by the way, we're going to need you to do some extra work. It's like, you have to actually make this something that's rewarding for these people, and acknowledge that they have too much on their plate.
I'm going to bring you the mic so we can all hear it.
Thank you. Though I believe I can be quite loud. Thank you. So I was interested in learning more about the network that you probably have around this associations of schools. For example, how do you interact with those who are not higher ed, but they are active in this field? And what type of relationship are you more like a facilitator? How would the network work outside these particular schools that you have here? With assessment companies, with foundations, with philanthropic foundations, or...
Well, I know how to work with philanthropy. Give me a call. Just kidding. So we work with a lot of philanthropic organizations. We are funded. We have 9 different funders. We're not anyone's thing, and we have a federal government-funded research grant, first in the world, that Georgia State Tim Rennick won. So we know how to do that. I would say with vendors, we are agnostic. But our campuses individually work with lots of them, and they also work in partnership with community-based organizations and all kinds of other folks. We're pretty narrow in terms of, we're focused on eliminating the achievement gaps on our campuses. So I say no to most things, because everyone, like, I get a lot of requests that, oh, you have this group, and so you should also try and do this thing and do this thing. And we don't want to be one of those things that just never actually accomplishes our goals because we got so popular and, like, just enjoyed hanging out with each other, and we're just going to keep, politely failing our students. So we are trying to actually achieve this, and we work with, if it's a vendor, again, I'm agnostic centrally, but each campus has to find the right vendor for them. So I don't know if that's a helpful answer, but yeah, I think that we're an experiment. We are a public experiment showing that you can create collaboration that actually helps you, that you can actually move faster together, but we have not achieved our objective. We are not done. We have not closed our achievement gaps. 2 of our campuses have done that. And so until we get there, we don't think we should do a spin out and try and expand membership or do anything. Again, we're actually serious about this.
So it sounds like when you say collaborate, you're talking about these institutions sharing sort of best practices of what's working at their individual institutions. I'm just wondering, my name's Lorraine. I teach at a liberal arts college in upstate New York, and I directed faculty development for a while. And that's such an important piece, particularly with first-generation students and how we advise. So where is it sort of going down to sort of the faculty and their role in making sure these enrollments stay? And so much of that is, doing experiential learning where students get engaged. So where's that piece? Because if I believe it has to be from the bottom up too, and faculty need the support to, they're on the front line with these students.
Yeah, so we're not including faculty because we think that's not important. It's actually the opposite. We're triaging that the urgency right now is in the administrative side. That it's a design problem. We have some serious issues around getting our data to be useful for the people who need it, making sure academic advisors have what they need, frontline, people who are really the concierge that the last person a student will ever talk to before they never come back, making sure that we have ambitious goals that are realistic, that we're actually sharing our data transparently. We have some stuff to fix. So I think it's more the theory of change is we're going to focus through this community practice on the administrative redesign of our institutions and improvement and scaling. What we see already works. But we've also invited faculty in many different cases, and we have faculty members who are amongst our group that we're kind of, they're organizing their own conversations amongst similar positioned folks. And I think that there is nothing but opportunity here, but I don't think that I should be the ones telling them what to do. I think that the magic that's happening inside of a classroom, you don't need me messing with that. I do think that there's a lot of opportunity to apply the pedagogy that we are expecting faculty to use to the professional development of faculty. We often are telling them, use active learning, use project-based learning, but I'm going to sit here and do a lecture and tell you about project-based learning, right? So I think there's a lot of faculty who are saying that that's what they want. They want to actually be a part of this. So yeah, they're invited to the table. Many of our campus teams are bringing a faculty member to our national summit, but we're just triaging and starting right on the administrative side at the moment.
So we have time for one more question. I see over here.
It better be a really good one, like the best question.
I'm really curious about the metrics. I think that that's great that 2 of your schools have already achieved this outcome of closing the achievement gap, which is incredibly lofty, and that the others are working towards it. And so I'm curious if it's around persistence and graduation rates, or kind of to the question about these boot camps, if there's also metrics, if there are also metrics around job placement and economic mobility over time.
So the campus that has done it from like work inside the institution, really over a small period of time, is Georgia State, and he left. But what they did is it's their graduation rate. They've eliminated race and income as a predictor of outcome. They doubled their graduation rate in the span of 7 years, and they did it by intense proactive advising and predictive analytics over time. But they've slowly just changed I would say it's the posture of the institution. It used to be defense, and now they play offense. They know that something's wrong with a student before the student even knows something's wrong. And they intervene with 3,000 advising hours every Monday. For the students who have triggered an alert, they have 800 different indicators at every moment in time they're capturing. So they know that you registered for the wrong class. They know that you didn't show up for your advising appointment, or you missed a midterm. And they will intervene that week. So imagine that kind of an institution is obviously not going, they're catching things very quickly and triaging. So what we're finding is that, each campus has to figure out what works for them, but all the campuses are finding ways to be inspired by each other's progress. And Georgia State's one example where most campuses can take a lesson out of what they've done and apply it. And so they're focusing first on graduation rates, but they also are working, I believe, with the Gallup organization on some longer term data. And I hope that answered your question.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This has been a real treat to sit down with you, Bridget, again. And thank you for all the work that you do, and for just improving student success in the country. We need more leaders like you out there championing the cause. If you are interested in learning more about the UIA, you can look up Bridget. What is your?
Go to our summit.
Go to your summit.
You can register.
And to learn more about the film, go to unlikelyfilm.com, and stay tuned. It will be premiering sometime soon. We're almost done with it. And I also want to thank Wells Fargo for sponsoring our 6-part content series over South by Southwest on student success. And wish you all the best on your travels back home or here. Thank you.
Thank you.